Alright, welcome in everybody. So the first deck we're going to be covering is a mono green deck. This one's Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. One colorless, two forests. To player, she's a 2/3. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. Often we're going to be playing the biggest creatures because we're playing mono green, we're playing big chunky beasts, but throughout the game we might draw a card or two off that ability. It's not really what our main focus is. Our main focus is our other ability. So you have to pay a forest tapper, add X mana and any combination of colors to your mana pool, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So what we want to be doing is putting big creatures on the board as fast as possible, and then using Selvala to ramp to even get more creatures and card draw, and then hopefully give everything trample, boost it all, and just slam everybody with a whole bunch of chunky creatures. So probably our best draw in this deck would be a 1-drop creature that taps for mana, so we could get Selvala out on turn 2. And then turn 3, hopefully drop something chunky. We have minimum access to turn 5 mana on turn 3 if we have her out on turn 2. So really powerful commander. As far as mono green goes, possibly the strongest, and this deck really is just really fun. Definitely one of the decks I'll be keeping. Mono green's probably my favorite color, so I'll just put Selvala all over here. So Selvala is our main way to ramp in the deck, but there's other ways. We have Nissa's Pilgrimage. Probably, I would say, an underrated card. You see often Cultivate on deck lists, but if you're playing mono green, I think Nissa's Pilgrimage has a bit more of an upside. Minimum, you're getting 2 lands, one of them's into play tapped, and if you have Spell Mastery, you could get 3 lands out of it, so actually a little bit better than Cultivate if you're in mono green. Gaia's Touch. This is another sneaky good card that I don't see a lot of people running. Also keep in mind, guys, I stopped putting cards into my decks probably around 2020, so I'm sure there's other cards you guys could be running out there. They've printed so many cards in the last couple of years since I stopped playing and stopped buying. But I think my decks are still pretty competitive and still a lot of fun. But Gaia's Touch, this one's from the dark. It's a 2-drop enchantment, 2 forests to play it. You may put 1 additional land in play during each of your turns, but that land must be a basic forest. You may sacrifice Gaia's Touch to add 2 green to your mana pool. This ability is played as an interrupt. So this wording you don't see anymore, interrupts. That's pretty much the old way of saying instant. So at any time you could sacrifice this enchantment to get 2 extra land. What's really good about this enchantment is you get it out, you play an extra land. And if you have more lands in the turn in your hand, you might want to keep it out. But on the next turn, you untap all your lands, maybe play an extra one, and then sacrifice this. So it allows you to really ramp quick over the course of 2 turns. Yeah, I think it's a really good card. Yeah. Before we mentioned Cultivate, this one allows you to get any color land, so this is why you see this card played so often. Growing Rights of Itlamok. So this is a legendary enchantment which flips into a land. Uh, so when Growing Rites of Itlamok enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library and reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So that ability is definitely better in a deck that you're running a lot of creatures in. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures, transform Growing Rites of Itlamok. And I believe it's Gaia's Cradle, the same ability as Gaia's Cradle, right? So yeah, you could either tap it for a green, or you could tap it to add a green to your mana pool for each creature you control. So this deck's not really built around abusing this, because you want to be going wide with, like a token deck's probably going to be your best bet for really abusing this land. But still, it could, even if you have 4 or 5 creatures out, if it's tapping for 4 or 5 mana, that's still pretty solid. So a good ramp card, and because we're running a lot of creatures in this deck, it allows us to find an extra card usually. So Vernal Bloom. Whenever a forest is tapped for mana, its controller adds an extra green to his or her mana pool. So often, if you're the only, in the ideal scenario, you're the only deck running green at the table. But, even if you're helping your opponents out, because this will help them out if they have force, it works for your opponents as well as yourself. But, if nobody's running force, this card is really, really strong. Next one. So this is a combo card for our commander. Umbral Mantle. It's 3 mana to get it out. It's an artifact equipment. 0 to equip, so you could just move it on to whatever creature for free. And then equip creature has. Pay 3 mana, untap it. This creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. So the pumping ability is sometimes actually can be relevant. If Selvala actually happens to be the biggest creature on the board, you could pump her a bunch, but really it's untapping her is what's the strongest part, because if she's tapping for 5-10 mana, then you untap her again and then get to tap her. Say she taps for 10 mana, you pay 3 to untap her, then you have 7 left over, then you could tap for another 10. That's like 17 mana. So yeah, it gets out of control really, really fast. And you can untap it multiple times as long as you have the mana to do it. So a really good combo piece for Selvala. Nature's Lore. Search your library for a force card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Yeah, it's just simple ramp. Again, there's not a lot of ramp in this deck because Selvala really is what we want to be focused on ramping with. And we want to slow down everybody else in the meantime, because we're not going to be running any artifacts. I don't believe there's a single artifact in this deck. I could be let's just double check here. I think besides Umbral Mantle, I believe, is the only artifact in this deck. So this is more often than not, one-sided. And because people run so many artifacts, especially mana rocks, you could really slow other... Sorry, I'll be stopping to drink some coffee once in a while during this video. I believe I'll be talking quite a bit, but destroying all their artifacts, especially mana rocks, could really slow your opponents down. And when you're not running any yourself, it's just all upside. Here's an old song that's an old card that's pretty tricky. So this is another one that shuts down artifacts. So it's a 4 mana enchantment, 3 colorless and a green. All non-creature artifacts in play lose all their usual abilities and become artifact creatures with toughness and power both equal to their casting costs. If Titania's Song leaves play, artifacts return to normal just before the untap phase of the next turn. So that's kind of tricky to remember when to do that, but either way, yeah, it turns all their mana rocks into. So say they have a soul ring that cost 1 to get out. It turns their soul ring into a 1/1. If they have a 6 mana artifact, it would be a 6/6, and so on. But it's really shutting down all their mana artifacts with that is what's kind of hilarious. So not a ton of control in this deck. Lignify is probably one of the few options we got. Mono green's not really known for that to begin with. So Lignify, what it does, it's 2 mana to put it out, and you want to be throwing it on your enemies' creatures. So Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a tree folk with base power and toughness 0/4. So 0/4, it's a good chance they'll survive attacks. So it just keeps them on the board as a useless wall. And if it's a really good creature, it's much better off having a 0/4 defender or tree folk, whatever it is, than, some big angel or some big demon or who knows what you have to deal with. So this is definitely one of the good finisher options in green. Overwhelming Stampede. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So yeah, because we're playing a bunch of big, juicy creatures, we're just boosting our whole team, whatever it is, and giving them all trample. Often this card will finish games if you play it at the right time. Selvala Stampede, another Stampede card. This is 6 mana. So this card doesn't end games necessarily, but it could be heavily valuable. So it has Council's Dilemma, sorcery. So, starting with you. Each player votes for wild or free. Revealed cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. For each wild vote, put those creature cards onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest into your library. You may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield for each free vote. Yeah, so you just get a ton of value. Either you're getting lands for free, or you're getting to drop some huge permanent out of your hand. Both options are pretty good, so yeah, awesome card. Genesis Wave. If you have a way to give your creatures haste, this could also be a finisher, but definitely if you want to expand your board exponentially. Here, let's just move this a little bit more into the light. So, reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of permanent cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield into your graveyard. So it's 3 green and then X. So anything like sorceries or instants are just going to go to your graveyard. But any permanents are going onto the battlefield. That includes lands, because they have technically a cost of 0. And they are permanents. So yeah, you just pay a huge number to X and then throw out a huge amount of stuff from your deck. Rishkar's Expertise. This is a really good card. 6 mana. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So definitely good effect for our deck. But also the second ability, you may cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So because you're drawing cards before that, um, chances are you're going to have a good selection of cards, and then you get to play something for 5. So there's a lot of value you're getting out of this card. Really good card. Next up, we got Sandworm Convergence. Big enchantment, 8 mana. Creatures with flying can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 green worm creature token. So just a good enchantment to rebuild your board slowly. If there's a board wipe and they don't deal with this, at the minimum, you're going to be getting a 5/5 back on the board. And it's a good way to shut down flying creatures because mono green, we don't have a lot of access to flying creatures. We have reach often, but that's about it. Rancor, just a go-to green enchantment. +2/+0 and has trample, and when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, comes back to our hand. So this allows us to just pump up whatever our biggest creature is. Often we could use this early game, even on Selvala. Put it on her, gives her 4 power, and then all of a sudden she's tapping for 4. Or, put it on some other creature, and, Selvala's tapping for just that much more mana, as well as giving your creature trample, which is sometimes very relevant. Seasons Past. Return any number of cards with different converted mana costs from your graveyard to your hand. Put Seasons Past on the bottom of its owner's library. So this is a card that's kind of repeatable, as long as nobody counters it or anything like that, and just keeps going back on the bottom of your library to use again. And it allows us to get a bunch of cards back from our graveyard, which, mono green's not necessarily known for that, but this is a good card for doing that. Garruk's Uprising. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature card with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So yeah, a good draw engine. Sorry. Because we're drawing so many playing so many big creatures, a lot of them are going to have power 4 or greater. Just great card draw. Really good card. Next up, Heroic Intervention. Really good card to save your stuff from board wipes. And often, if you save your whole board from a board wipe and nobody else is able to, that could be a game over in a lot of instances, especially if you have a big board. You could catch your opponent off guard, and they're not going to realize they just spent all their mana trying to wipe the board, and then you just save your board, and now all of a sudden they've got no blockers. So yeah, I've definitely seen this card do some work. Yeah, great card. Traverse the Outlands. So another card that, is just a great fit for this deck. It's a sorcery. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So yeah, because we're going tall, not wide, we're putting a lot of chunky creatures out, and often that could get us a lot of lands. So this is a tricky old card. I really like this card, actually. Hall of Gemstone. So it's 3 mana, enchant world. That's a card type I don't believe you see anymore. During each player's upkeep, that player chooses a color. Until end of turn, each mana producing land produces mana of the chosen color instead of its normal color. So this card, why it's so devastating is on your turn, obviously because we're mono green, we're gonna pick green. That affects not only us, but it affects everybody else. So it essentially shuts down control on our turn, unless they have mana rocks or something like that. But their land's not going to produce any blue or black or whatever they need to kill our stuff or counter our stuff. And then on your opponent's turn, if they're playing multicolor decks, they're only allowed to choose one color. So often, if they have multicolored cards, that is shutting that down, and it's forcing them to choose, a single color. They might not be able to play all the cards they want to that turn. So often, this card is very devastating in the right situations. And regrowth. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So just another way to get cards back. This card definitely, if we somehow lose Season's Growth, what was it? Seasons Past, which is our main graveyard retrieval. If we lose that card in the graveyard and we could get it back with this, really good play right there. And now we're gonna move on to probably the main focus of the deck. Sorry to shake you guys there. The creatures. Temur Sabertooth. This creature is phenomenal. Does a lot of good work in a lot of decks. There's a couple combos in this deck. So his ability seems it's surprising, because you read it and you're like, oh, it's not that good. But when you really understand it, it's a sneaky good card. So this is a 4 mana, 4/3. He has an ability of 2 mana. You may return another creature you control to its owner's hand. If you do, Temur Sabertooth gains indestructible until end of turn. So your first thoughts are, your mind tends to go to, oh well, he gets indestructible, but he's only a 4/3. Who cares? But it's the bouncing of your creatures that's really important, and it's repeatable. So there's a lot of cool tricks we can do with that. And in decks where you have creatures that have enter abilities or leaving abilities, that could be really, really good. So here's one card that actually combos well with that Temur Sabertooth, which is Aquarion Ranger, 1 green, a 1/1 elf. Return a forest you control to its owner's hand. Untap target creature. Use this ability only once each turn. So the reason it combos well with Temur Sabertooth is it's only 1 green to play her. So say we play her, we use her ability, untap target creature, which is probably going to be Selvala, which will allow us to tap her again for a bunch of mana. Then we're going to bounce her back to her hand with Temur Sabertooth, replay her. Now, because she's re-entering the battlefield, she counts as a new creature, we're allowed to use this ability once again. So because it makes this ability repeatable, that's what that combo really could go off and allow Selvala to tap multiple times. And any turn where you're able to tap Selvala multiple times for mana, you're probably going to be doing something good. All right, we got Ronus the Indomitable, legendary creature god. Um, I forget what you call these special cards, um, but it was like a lottery ticket back in the day. I believe this was in the Amonkhet block. Anyways, let's not get sidetracked here. This guy potentially is a 5/5 creature with Death Touch and Indestructible. And it says, Ronus the Indomitable can't attack or block unless you control another creature with power 4 or greater. Okay, no, so I'm wrong. Yeah, so he counts as a creature all the time, but he can only attack or block unless you have another creature another big creature, essentially. He also has an ability of pay 3 mana, another target creature gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. And this ability is repeatable. Doesn't force them to tap or anything. So as long as we have the mana, we could dump a bunch of mana into that ability, make a creature super huge, allow Selvala to tap for a bunch of mana. Then if we could untap her, then we could keep boosting. It could really get out of hand and yeah, because it counts as a creature all the time. It's 3 mana for a 5/5. It gives us 5 power on the board, and it's a good early gameplay. Another combo card, we have Wirewood Symbiote. Return an elf you control to its owner's hand, untap target creature. Activate this ability only once each turn. Yeah, so we don't have probably a ton of elves, but the elves we do have, I believe most of them have enter the battlefield abilities. So this is really good, and it also combos well with Quirion Ranger, which is also an elf. So much like Teamer Sabretooth, Wirewood Symbiote is a sneaky good combo card. And yeah, just another way to untap Selvala to tap for a bunch more mana. Another finisher card. This one's a goat. Pathbreaker Ibex, 6 mana. Whenever Pathbreaker Ibex attacks, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So essentially just a repeatable, overwhelming stampede on a body. Really scary good card. Alright, next up we've got Great Oak Guardian. This is a really good card in the deck too. Flash, you may cast this spell anytime. You could cast an instant, and it's got reach, so you can catch, a flying creature off guard. But mostly it's for its ability. When it enters the battlefield, creatures target player controls get +2/+2 till end of turn, untap them. So it allows us to pump our whole team and then untap our whole team, including Selvala. So definitely some more combo shenanigans. And if we're able to bounce it, replay it, keep pumping our team, untapping them. Primeval Protectors, 11 mana, 10/10. Cost 1 less to cast for each creature your opponents control. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. So it's just a really big body, 10/10, and it's pumping the rest of your team, but it's could also be, especially in a multiplayer game, uh, this could end up costing you close to that 1 green mana pretty easily. And yeah, a 1 mana 10/10. Nothing to shrug at. Next, we got Vizier of the Menagerie. So this is some card advantage. 3/4, you may look at the top card of your library. You may cast the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast creature spells. So that last ability is not really relevant for our deck because we're mono green. But looking at the top card of our library, and because we're running a lot of creatures, often we can abuse that second ability. Pretty good card. Llanowar Elves, definitely one of the cards we want to see in our opening hand. It allows us to play Selvala on turn 2. Here's another elf, definitely one we want to repeat. So if we bounce this back to our hand, when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. So it allows us to control the board, our opponent's board a little bit, slow them down. Sorry, I keep shaking the old tripod here. Verdurous Gearhulk, 5 mana, 4/4 with trample. When it enters the battlefield, distribute 4+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. So you could just dump them all on itself, and it's essentially a 5 mana 9/9 with trample. But you could also just dump it on, if you have a bigger creature, dump it on that, and then again, we want to go tall, so we just want the biggest possible creature out on the board. Scavenging Ooze. So this is good for against decks that are leaning heavily into their graveyard. Exile target creature card from, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, put a +1/+1 counter on Scavenging Ooze, and you gave 1 life. So sometimes that's relevant to get rid of creature cards and boost the ooze. Generally, we're not looking to make ooze the biggest creature on the board. We just want to be removing cards from our opponent's graveyards if they have any shenanigans going on. And because it's any card, not just creatures. Yeva, Nature's Herald. Flash 4/4 for 4 mana. You may cast green creature cards as though they had flash. So yeah, it just allows us to go off on our opponent's turns as well as our own turns. This could be really good because you sneak it in at the end of your opponent's turn that's right before you. You know, you could fill up the board, and before they have a chance to do anything about it. Very good. And, you know, playing out your stuff during your opponent's turns there's a lot of benefit to it. Finned Horn Elves. So here's an old one from Ice Age. Tap to add a broccoli to your mana pool. Play this ability as an interrupt. So some goofy looking art here. Some of the old Magic art is good, but then some of it's cheesy. It's a mixed batch. Primal Crux. This could be a huge elemental beast. Very cool artwork on it. So 6 mana to put him out, but has trample, and his power and toughness are each equal to the number of green mana symbols and the mana cost of permanents you control. This could get really big. So, right, if you have just him on the board, he's a 6/6. You know, if you have, say, him and this next one, that's an 8/8. So this card could get really out of control quick. Next up, we have Prowling Serpopard. A really good card if you're playing against control decks. 3 mana to get him out. Can't be countered, and creature spells you control can't be countered. That effect's just really good because nobody likes getting their stuff countered. It's just unfun, but it is a definite necessity. And it's a good part of the game. It's not a part of the game I dislike. It's just not, you know, it's just not fun sometimes. 5 mana, 4/4 Dryad. This one's Conclave Naturalist. Really cool artwork on this one. Reminds me a bit of Rebecca Gui's artwork, but not quite. Um, when she enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. Um, Similar to Reclamation Sage, except on a bigger body. And a little bit more mana to get her out. Mango Horn, 3 mana, 2/2 beast. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy a target artifact. Artifacts your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. This effect is sneaky good, but you have to remember to remind your opponents because often this is like an ability. If you don't remind your opponents, it's easy to overlook when there's a lot of stuff going on the board. And yeah, just another form of control. And because we're not running any artifacts, it's just good to slow down our opponent's artifacts. Next, we got Realm Seekers. This is 6 mana. When it enters the battlefield, Realm Seekers enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the total number of cards in all players' hands. So in a multiplayer game, this card gets exponentially better. One-on-one, it could still be really good one-on-one, but in a multiplayer game, this card really shines. Then you could pay 3 mana, remove a +1/+1 counter on it, search your library for the land card, reveal it, put into your hand, then shuffle your library. This is any land, so that includes your special lands as well. Your non-basics, really good card. Galta, Primal Hunger, 12 mana, 12/12 trample. Cost X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. Yeah, potentially a 2 mana, 12/12 trample. Really good card, especially good in this deck. Nothing like having 12 power on the board and Selvala tapping for 12 mana. Palaka Worm, 7 mana, trample. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 7 life. When it dies, draw a card. So just good value on the way in and good value on the way out. And it's a big 7/7 body. Next, we got Wayward Swordtooth, 3 mana with 5/5 with Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Can't attack or block unless you have the City's Blessing. So City's Blessing doesn't really do anything for us in this deck except for allow him to attack or block. But really what we want this creature for is the 5 power as well as playing an additional land. Baru, Fist of Krosa. This is a card you don't see a lot of people running. But a pretty good card in a mono green deck. It's a 5 mana, legendary creature, human, druid. Whenever a forest comes into play, green creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. Discard another card named Baru. So that second ability is irrelevant because in Commander you could only run 1, but that first ability, if we play like a Cultivate, it allows us to get 2 lands out in a turn. If we have a card that allows us to get multiple lands out, this ability could get pretty big pretty fast. But even just +1/+1 for 1 land and trample till end of turn often it's pretty good. Verdant Sun Avatar, 7 mana, 5/5 dinosaur avatar. When it enters the battle, words are getting hard at this point. We've been talking for a while. Whenever Verdant Sun's avatar or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. Yeah, so it's kind of, this card's definitely cuttable. We don't have a ton of life gain in the deck, so that, this is probably one of the few ways we have to gain life in the deck. But it's just a big chunky creature, and you know, I had it in foil. I think that's probably what suckered me into playing it. Elvish Mystic, another 1-drop that we want on turn 1. Eternal Witness, 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So this card is definitely capable of a whole bunch of shenanigans. If we could bring it back from the graveyard to our hand, then we could drop it to return another card. There's a whole bunch of combos. If we bounce it, if we return this card to our hand and repeat it, yeah, there's just a lot of ways. Really good card. Whoa. And actually here, I'll mention this one. Woodland Bellower, 6 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a non-legendary green creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. Put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Often, this is going to get Eternal Witness. Once in a while, we might get a Reclamation Sage to blow up an artifact or enchantment if we need to. But this card just really strong. Being able to search your library, even for a creature that's 3 or less, still really good. Steel Leaf Champion, 3 mana, 5/4 Elf Knight. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Not the best creature in the world, but it's 3 mana and it's 5 power. And it also, this is actually relevant for a couple reasons. The fact that it's 3 just force. When we get to the lands, I'll show you my favorite land in the game, and I'll tell you why you'll understand why that card's relevant. Next we have Hydra Broodmaster, 6 mana, 7/7 Hydra, with an ability of Monstrosity X. So if it's not monstrous, you could put X counters on it, +1/+1 counters on it, and it becomes monstrous. So the more mana you sink into this, the better it's going to be. When Hydra Broodmaster becomes monstrous, put XX green Hydra creature tokens onto the battlefield. So you could really, say you paid, you have to pay whatever, the same amount of mana for both X's. So let's just say 11 mana. So that would be 5 for each X, and then the 11th mana is the forest. That would give you 5/+1 counters on this Hydra, as well as 5/5 green Hydra creature tokens. If X was 10, then you're getting 10 of them, and they're 10/10s, and he's getting 10 counters. It just gets really crazy the more mana you pour into it. Elder Scale Worm. Now, this is the kind of card, if your opponent doesn't have a way to deal with it, I've actually shut down games completely where my opponent wasn't able to deal with it, and this card just essentially won the game for me on its own. It's a 7 mana Elder Scale Worm, 7/7 Trample. When Elder Scale Worm enters the battlefield, if your life total is less than 7, your life total becomes 7. As long as you have 7 or more life, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 7 reduces it to 7 instead. Yeah, so it just keeps you alive. Even if they have a bunch of flyers, doesn't matter. If they won't be able to get you down below 7 unless they kill this thing. And if you have a way to give it hexproof or give it indestructible, yeah, it could be a real good threat, that card. Bane of Progress, 6 mana, 2/2 elemental. When it enters the battlefield, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Put a +1/+1 counter on Bane of Progress for each permanent destroyed this way. So potentially comes out as a really big creature, and also destroys a bunch of your opponent's artifacts and enchantments. And because we're not running a lot of those, It's often one-sided. Uvenwald Tracker, 1 mana, 1/1, has an ability of 2 mana, tap it. Target creature you control fights another target creature. Just good removal. We don't have a lot of spot removal, so this is a good way to deal with our opponent's creatures. 5 mana Gigantosaurus. It's a 10/10 vanilla creature, no abilities, but it's a 10/10 for 5 mana. Yeah, and I've looked up the pricing on this card recently. Surprisingly expensive for what it is. It's just a vanilla creature. Garruk's Pack Leader, 5 mana, 4/4. Whenever another creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So just a good way to get a lot of card draw. Yeah. Most of our creatures are power 3 or greater, so. Goreclaw, Terror of Calcisma. Creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. Whenever Goreclaw attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 against trample to end a turn. Yeah, so it just makes our creatures cheaper. Most of our creatures have power 4 or greater, so that works for a lot of our creatures. And the +1/+1 in trample is often relevant, especially when you have creatures that are like, like this guy. A 10/10 could easily be blocked by a 1/1, but you give this 10/10 a +1/+1 in trample, and all of a sudden they've got a headache to deal with. We've got Nylea Keen-Eyed, 4 mana, indestructible god, 5/6. As long as your devotion to green is less than 5, Nylea isn't a creature. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Reveal the top card of your library, 3 mana. Reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. So it's good that it doesn't force you to put the card into your hand if it's not a creature. But, that could be good card advantage. Gives you a rebate on all your creatures. And as long as it is a creature, it's a 5/6 indestructible. So big body. Good card for 4 mana. I need a sip coffee break. Next up, we got Scrib Ranger, another combo card. 2 mana, flash flying fairy. Fairies are often in blue or black, so it's pretty interesting to see one in green, and by probably one of my favorite magic artists, Rebecca Gay. So yeah, 2 mana, flash, flying, protection from blue. Return a forest you control to its owner's hand, untap target creature. So just another way to untap Selvala. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of tap abilities in the deck besides Selvala. Now that I think of it, the deck's kind of set up to maybe abuse that a little bit more. Kamal, Fist of Krosa, 6 mana, 4/3. For 1 green mana, target land becomes a 1/1 creature until end of turn. It's still land. And then for 5 mana, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. So this card has a lot of sneaky tricks. So number 1, it allows us to both these abilities are repeatable. As long as we have the mana, we could use them any number of times in a turn we want. So if we have, like, say 15 mana, give all our creatures +9/+9 and trample to end of turn, that'll often finish a game. But this first ability is very sneaky too. Say you have a bunch of mana open, your opponent goes to board wipe. You could turn all their lands into 1/1s, and all their lands are going to get destroyed in the process. Very sneaky. And you could definitely set yourself up to abuse this ability in other ways too, I'm sure. Really good old card. Next up, we got Hydra Omnivore, 6 mana, 8/8. When it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. Um, so yeah, you could, smack one opponent and it hurts all your opponents. That's pretty good. But really, it's the 8/8 bodies really what we're looking for here. 6 mana is not hard to get to in this deck. Wood Elves, when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a force card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So yeah, an elf. So we're along with our other combo cards, we could bounce it back to our hand, replay it, keep getting force, and it just allows us to ramp good. And last but not least, for the creatures, Thrashing Brontodon. Pay 1, sacrifice it, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it's a 3 mana, 3/4 dinosaur. Yeah, good card. Just another way to deal with our opponent's artifacts or enchantments. We could do this right away the turn we play it. So for 4 mana, we get to destroy something, or for 3 mana, we have something sit on the board that, at least threatens to get rid of something when you need it. 4 lands, probably won't go through all of them, but we'll definitely have to take a look. This is my favorite land. This is my favorite card. I used to own a lot of copies of this. I still have probably a good number of copies, and you'll probably see this in a bunch of my decks. But taps for a mana, a colorless mana, or you could pay 2 and tap it, choose a color, add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So any mana symbols in your permanents count towards your devotion. This card I've tapped for a ridiculous amounts of mana, and if you're unable to untap it similar ways that you're abusing Selvala, this could really get out of control. Definitely my favorite card. Wirewood Lodge. It's like this card was built for Selvala. Pay a green, untap target elf. I mean, it's everything we want on a land. Field of Ruin allows us to destroy one of our opponent's lands and then every player gets to search up a basic land. Kind of ramp, like a weird kind of ramp, but also a good way to deal with your opponent's lands. Just another land removal land. And let's just take a look. I don't know if Wasteland. So we have a couple ways to deal with our opponent's lands. Anything else? Mosswort Bridge is a sneaky good card. Allows us to hide away something. And we often have a power creature, 10 or more. Reliquary Tower, staple in pretty much any commander deck, especially if you have a lot of card draw. Arch of Araska, it's card draw. We don't have a ton in green, but Ghost Quarter, another way to deal with our opponent's lands, and then we got all forests. So guys, wow. 53 minutes, 54 minutes. I don't think all my decks will take this long to get through. This just happens to be easily one of my favorite decks. Selvala, just great ramp and allows you to put out a bunch of big chunky creatures that you might not play in other decks. And it has a lot of combos with the tapping and untapping of it. It just gets out of control really fast. And like I said, if you have a 1-drop on turn 1, playing Selvala on turn 2, turn 3 is just going to be amazing for you. You're going to have a blast. Definitely a deck I suggest. If it's within your budget, Selvala used to be really, really expensive. I don't think she's as expensive these days. So if you get a good her for a good price, most of the rest of the deck is pretty cheap to build because, um, there's a lot of chunky green creatures out there. So you don't have to have the best creatures. Just there's a couple that I think Crater Hoof Behemoth. That definitely would be a good addition to this deck. But you don't need the top creatures because there's a lot of budget friendly big butt creatures in green. So yeah, it could be a budget deck if you want to do it that way. Um, but yeah, it was a lot of fun checking this one out and look forward to more. Thank you.